Commander Jake Morrison stared out the window of the HMS Endeavour as the alien space station grew larger on the screen. He had been in space for 15 years, but he had never seen anything like this. The station was huge, bigger than any city on Earth. It was made of some kind of metal that seemed to glow with its own light. Strange shapes moved around it, ships that looked nothing like human vessels. "We're really doing this," said Ambassador Lisa Carter, walking up behind him. She was nervous, but trying not to show it. This was the first time humans would meet aliens face to face. Everything they said or did could change the future of humanity forever. "The alien ships are approaching us," called out Captain Ryan Torres from his position at the communications desk. "They're asking us to follow them to the docking bay." Jake nodded and gave the order to follow the alien ships. As they moved closer to the station, he could see more details. The walls were covered in symbols that hurt his eyes to look at. Strange lights pulsed in patterns that seemed almost alive. Whatever these aliens were, they were far more advanced than humans. The docking process was smooth, which surprised Jake. The aliens had somehow made their technology work with human systems. When the airlock opened, the first thing that hit them was the smell. It was like flowers mixed with metal, sweet but sharp at the same time. 3 aliens waited for them in the docking bay. They were tall, much taller than humans, with skin that looked like it was made of crystal. Their faces were long and narrow, with large eyes that seemed to see everything at once. They wore robes that seemed to be made of light itself. "Welcome, humans," said the tallest alien in perfect English. His voice sounded like music, but there was something cold about it. "I am High Counselor Vextar of the Zephyrian Alliance. We have been waiting to meet you." Lisa stepped forward, trying to look confident. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I am Ambassador Lisa Carter, representing the people of Earth." Vexitar's large eyes studied her for a moment. "Yes, we know who you are. We have been watching your species for some time. That is why we asked you to come here. We have something very important to tell you." They were led through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. The wall showed pictures that moved like videos, but Jake couldn't understand what they were supposed to show. Other aliens walked past them, all different shapes and sizes. Some had fur, others had scales, and some looked like they were made of living metal. "How many species are in your alliance?" asked Dr. Helen Brooks, the team's scientist. She was trying to take notes on everything she saw. 12, replied Vextar. "All united under our protection and guidance. We have kept peace in this sector of the galaxy for over 2,000 years." They entered a large room with a table that seemed to be carved from a single piece of black stone. More aliens were waiting for them, representing different species from the Alliance. Jake noticed that they all seemed nervous about something. "Please sit," said Vextar, gesturing to chairs that adjusted themselves to fit human bodies. "We must tell you about a great danger that is coming your way." Lisa sat down and looked around the table. "What kind of danger?" One of the other aliens, a creature that looked like a giant insect, made a clicking sound. Vextar translated. "Commander Ziktar says that the danger has a name. They are called the Devourers." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Jake could see fear in the aliens' faces, even though their expressions were hard to read. "The Devourers consume entire worlds," Vextar continued. "They have been moving through space for thousands of years, destroying everything in their path. They take the resources of planets and leave nothing but dead rocks behind." "What do they want?" asked Ryan, leaning forward. "Everything," said another alien, this one covered in fur with 6 arms. "They do not trade, they do not talk, they do not make peace, they only take and destroy." Vextar stood up and the wall behind him lit up with images. Jake saw pictures of dead planets, their surfaces cracked and burned, cities that had been turned to ash, ships floating dead in space. "Every species in our alliance was given the same choice when the Devourers approached their space," Vexitar said. "Submit to our protection and become part of the alliance, or face the Devourers alone." Lisa felt her heart racing. "And what happened to those who refused?" The room fell silent. Finally, Vextar spoke. "They no longer exist." Dr. Helen looked at the images on the wall. Something bothered her about them, but she couldn't figure out what. How do you protect against them? We have treaties with the Devourers, explained Vextar. We give them what they need, and they leave our worlds alone. It is the only way to survive. Jake didn't like the sound of that. What exactly do you give them? The aliens looked at each other nervously. Resources, said Vextar quickly. Metals, energy, sometimes uninhabited planets they can strip for materials. Ryan was watching the aliens carefully. He had spent years learning to read people's body language, and these aliens were definitely hiding something. Their movements were too careful, their words too rehearsed. Why are you telling us this? Asked Lisa. Why not just let us find out about the Devourers ourselves? Because we do not wish to see another species destroyed, replied Vextar. The Devourers are already moving toward your space. Our scouts report that they will reach your outer colonies within 1 of your years. The human delegation exchanged worried looks. Earth's colonies were barely defended, and their military was designed to fight other humans, not alien invaders. What would joining your alliance mean for humanity? Lisa asked. You would be under our protection, said Vextar. Your military would be integrated with ours. Your colonies would be defended by our fleets. In return, you would contribute to the common defense and follow alliance laws. Helen was still studying the images on the wall. The more she looked at them, the more something seemed wrong. The destruction was too clean, too organized. It didn't look like the work of mindless destroyers. Can we have some time to discuss this among ourselves? Asked Lisa. The aliens seemed surprised by this request. Most species accept our protection. Immediately upon learning of the Devourers, said Vextar. Why do you hesitate? Because we like to understand all our options before making big decisions, replied Jake. It's just how humans work. The aliens looked at each other again. Jake could tell they found human behavior confusing. Very well, said Vextar finally. You may return to your ship to discuss. But do not take too long. The Devourers do not wait for anyone to make up their minds. As they walked back to their ship, Ryan moved close to Jake. Something's not right about this, he whispered. They're scared, but not just of these Devourers. They're scared of something else. Helen nodded. Did you see those images? The destruction patterns are too uniform. Either these Devourers are more organized than they're letting on, or there's something they're not telling us. Jake looked back at the alien station as they boarded their ship. We need to get this information back to Earth fast, and we need to start preparing for the worst. As the HMS Endeavour pulled away from the station, none of the humans noticed the small dark ships that had been watching from the shadows at the edge of the system. The scouts had been there for weeks, waiting and watching, learning about the newest species to enter their hunting grounds. The Devourers were already closer than anyone realized. 6 months had passed since the meeting with the Zephyrian Alliance. Earth's leaders had decided to reject the aliens' offer of protection. They wanted to remain free, even if it meant facing the Devourers alone. Now those dark ships that had been watching from the shadows were moving closer to human space. Colonel Amy Parker stood on the command deck of New Angeles Colony, watching the screens that showed space around their small world. The colony was home to 50,000 people who had come here to build a new life among the stars. Now they were about to become the first humans to face the Devourers in battle. Colonel, we have contacts coming out of jump space, called out Lieutenant Danny Chen from his position at the sensors. They're big, ma'am. Really big. Amy looked at the screen and felt her heart sink. The Devourer ships were nothing like anything humans had ever seen. They looked alive, like giant insects made of metal and flesh. Some were the size of skyscrapers. Others were as big as cities. They moved through space in ways that seemed to ignore the laws of physics. How many? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. 37 ships, Colonel, and they're heading straight for us. Amy had been a soldier for 20 years. She had fought in wars on Earth and in space, but she had never seen anything that made her feel so small and helpless. Still, she had a job to do. Send the evacuation signal to all civilians, she ordered. Get the transport ships ready to leave, and tell all military units to prepare for combat. The first attack came without warning. A beam of energy shot out from the largest Devourer ship and hit the colony's main power station. The entire building simply disappeared, turned into nothing but dust and smoke. Then more beams followed, hitting the spaceport, the factories, and the residential areas. "Return fire," shouted Amy. "All weapons target the lead ship." The colony's defense guns opened up, sending missiles and energy beams toward the Devourer fleet. The weapons hit their targets, but something strange happened. The first few hits seemed to hurt the alien ships, causing explosions and damage. But then the ships began to change. Their hulls shifted and adapted, and the same weapons that had worked before suddenly had no effect at all. "What the hell?" muttered Sergeant Bob Williams, watching from the gun control room. "It's like they're learning from each hit." Amy realized with growing horror that the aliens could adapt to anything humans threw at them. Every weapon that worked once would never work again. The Devourers were not just strong, they were smart enough to become immune to human technology in real time. The battle lasted for 3 hours. Human soldiers fought bravely, trying every weapon and tactic they knew. But for every small victory, the Devourers adapted and came back stronger. The colony's defenses were overwhelmed one by one. "Colonel, we have to evacuate now," said Lieutenant Chen. "The transport ships are ready, but they won't be able to leave much longer." Amy looked around the command center. Half her people were dead or wounded. The screen showed Devourer ships landing on the colony's surface, releasing creatures that looked like a nightmare mix of insect and machine. These ground forces were systematically destroying everything they found. "All remaining units fall back to the evacuation point," she ordered. "We'll cover the transports as long as we can." As they retreated through the burning colony, Amy's team managed to capture something valuable. A damaged Devourer scout had crashed near the spaceport. Despite the danger, Corporal Jane Foster and her squad grabbed the wreckage and brought it to the transport ship. "This might tell us how they work," said Jane, looking at the strange biomechanical parts. "Maybe we can find a weakness." The transport ships lifted off just as the Devourer ground forces reached the evacuation point. Amy watched from the ship's window as her colony burned. 50,000 people had called New Angeles home. Only 12,000 had made it to the ships. Back on Earth, General Peter Collins received the news of New Angeles' fall with grim determination. He had been preparing for this day since the meeting with the Zephyrians. In his laboratory, Dr. Kevin Stone was already working on the wreckage that Amy's team had captured. "What do you see, Doctor?" asked the general, looking over Kevin's shoulder at the alien technology. Kevin was studying the biomechanical parts under a microscope. "It's incredible, General. This isn't just technology, it's alive. The metal and flesh are somehow merged together. But there's something else." He pointed to a section of the wreckage that looked like brain tissue. "This part controls their adaptation ability. It learns from every attack and sends that information to the rest of their fleet. That's why our weapons stopped working." "Is there a way to stop it?" Kevin was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Maybe. The system is designed to adapt to direct attacks and technological threats, but I don't think it knows how to handle something completely unpredictable." Meanwhile, Captain Rebecca Adams was leading the destroyer UNS Phoenix on a desperate mission to evacuate the outer colonies before the Devourers could reach them. Her ship was fast and well-armed, but she knew that wouldn't matter much against an enemy that could adapt to any weapon. "Captain, we're receiving a distress signal," reported Communications Officer Lisa Park. "It's coming from a ship about 2 light hours away." "Human or alien?" asked Rebecca. "Alien, ma'am. The signal is using Zephyrian codes." Rebecca made a quick decision. "Change course, let's see what they want." They found the Zephyrian ship drifting in space, its hull cracked and leaking atmosphere. It was clear the ship had been in a fight and had barely escaped with its life. Rebecca ordered her crew to bring the alien survivors aboard. The Zephyrian officer who came aboard was young for his species, with crystal skin that was cracked and dull. He introduced himself as Sub-Commander Kyle Hun and seemed surprised to see humans willing to help him. "Why did you save us?" he asked Rebecca as they sat in the ship's medical bay. "Your species rejected our protection. We expected you to leave us to die." "That's not how humans work," replied Rebecca. We help people in trouble even if they're not our friends. Kyle Han looked at her with his large, strange eyes. You do not understand what you are facing. The Devourers are not just destroyers. They are a weapon. What do you mean? The alien was quiet for a long time, as if deciding whether to speak. Finally, he looked up at Rebecca. The Devourers were not born. They were made. Created by the Zephyrian Alliance thousands of years ago to control the galaxy. Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. You created them? My ancestors did, said Kyle Han, his voice full of shame. The Alliance needed a way to make other species submit to our rule. So we made the Devourers. We tell species they can join us for protection, or face the Devourers alone. What we do not tell them is that we control when and where the Devourers attack. But they attacked your ship. Kyle Han nodded sadly. Some of us have grown tired of the lies. We tried to warn other species about the truth. The High Council decided we were traitors and sent the Devourers after us. Rebecca's mind was racing. Everything the Zephyrians had told them was a lie. The protection they offered was fake. They were feeding species to their own creation to maintain power. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because your species did something no one has done in 1,000 years, said Kyle Han. You said no. You chose to fight instead of submit. The High Council is terrified of you. Terrified? Of humans? We just lost an entire colony. Yes, but you fought back. You made them adapt. Most species run or surrender immediately. You forced the Devourers to use abilities they rarely need. The High Council is worried that you might actually find a way to defeat them. Rebecca stood up, her mind already planning. We need to get this information back to Earth immediately. If the Devourers are a weapon, maybe we can find a way to turn it off. As the UNS Phoenix raced back toward Earth with its explosive cargo of information, other human colonies were preparing for their own battles with the Devourers. The aliens had expected humanity to crumble after the first defeat. Instead, humans were getting angry, and as every military leader in history could tell you, angry humans were the most dangerous kind. The truth about the Devourers had spread through Earth's military like wildfire. Now humanity knew they were fighting not just alien destroyers, but a weapon designed to force species into submission. This changed everything. Instead of trying to fight the Devourers with better technology, human commanders began thinking about how to fight them with better ideas. Lieutenant Commander Scott Williams sat in the war room on Luna Base, staring at battle reports from 12 different colony attacks. Each time the same pattern repeated. Human weapons worked for a few minutes, then the Devourers adapted and became immune. Traditional military tactics were useless against an enemy that learned from every encounter. We're thinking about this all wrong, Scott said to the other officers around the table. We keep trying to outgun them, but that's exactly what they're designed to handle. What if we try to outthink them instead? General Collins leaned forward. What do you mean? The Devourers adapt to logical threats, Scott explained. Their brains analyze our tactics and develop counters. But what if we use tactics that don't make sense? What if we fought in ways that seem completely stupid? Dr. Monica Rodriguez had been studying the captured Devourer technology for weeks. She looked up from her notes with excitement. That might actually work. Their adaptation system is designed to counter intelligent military strategy. It studies patterns and creates responses. But if there's no pattern to study, then they can't adapt, finished Scott. We need to fight like crazy people. Monica stood up and walked to the display screen. I've been working on something I call the Chaos Protocol. Instead of organized battle formations, we use tactics that appear completely random. Ships that seem to malfunction, weapons that appear to misfire, movements that look like accidents but are actually carefully planned. Admiral Chris Thompson, who had been quiet during the discussion, finally spoke. You're talking about making our own people look incompetent on purpose. That goes against everything we've learned about warfare. Yes, sir, said Scott. But everything we've learned about warfare assumes we're fighting other intelligent beings who think like us. The Devourers think like machines. They expect us to be logical, so we'll be illogical. The first test of the Chaos Protocol came at Titan Station, humanity's largest fuel depot in the outer system. Captain Tony Mitchell commanded a small fleet of 12 ships, all that Earth could spare for the defense. Intelligence reports showed that 30 Devourer ships were approaching the station. Tony's fleet looked like a disaster waiting to happen. Ships flew in formations that made no military sense. Some vessels appeared to have engine problems, drifting in random directions. Others seemed to have communication failures, ignoring orders and acting independently. To any observer, human or alien, the fleet looked like it was falling apart. The Devourers approached with confidence. Their previous encounters with humans had taught them to expect organized resistance, followed by quick adaptation and victory. What they found instead confused their biomechanical brains. All ships, begin Phase 1 of the Chaos Protocol. Tony broadcast on an open channel, knowing the Devourers were listening. And remember, make it look like everything is going wrong. The human ships scattered in what appeared to be panic. One destroyer, the UNS Ranger, seemed to lose control and spun wildly through space. Another ship, the cruiser Hartford, appeared to have a reactor leak and began venting atmosphere. The whole fleet looked like it was about to destroy itself, without any help from the enemy. The Devourers, programmed to pursue fleeing prey, followed the scattered human ships. This was exactly what Tony had hoped for. The alien vessels split up to chase individual targets, breaking their own formation and separating from mutual support. "Now," whispered Tony into his communicator. The seemingly out-of-control Ranger suddenly straightened out and fired a full spread of missiles at the Devourer ship that had been chasing it. The damaged Hartford's reactor leak turned out to be a clever disguise for a new type of weapon that sprayed corrosive chemicals. Other human ships revealed hidden weapons and began attacking from unexpected angles. But the real surprise was what happened when the Devourers tried to adapt. Their biomechanical brains attempted to analyze the human tactics and develop counters. However, the human behavior was so random and seemingly self-destructive that the adaptation system became confused. It couldn't create a response to tactics that appeared to have no logic behind them. "They're hesitating," reported Lieutenant Amy Foster from the sensor station. "The Devourer ships have stopped moving. It's like they're trying to process what just happened." Tony smiled grimly. "That's our window. All ships, execute ramming speed." What happened next would have horrified any traditional military commander. Human ships deliberately crashed into Devourer vessels, using their own destruction as weapons. But these weren't suicide attacks. Each ramming was carefully calculated to cause maximum damage while giving the human crew time to escape in life pods. The Once Defiant, badly damaged and about to explode anyway, rammed directly into the largest Devourer ship. Captain Mary Chen had evacuated her crew 30 seconds before impact, but the aliens didn't know that. To the Devourers, it looked like humans were willing to die just to hurt them. One by one, the Devourer ships were destroyed or damaged beyond repair. The few that tried to retreat found their escape routes blocked by human ships that seemed to appear from nowhere. Tony's fleet had used the chaos of battle to position themselves perfectly. "Titan Station is secure," Tony reported back. To Earth. "Enemy fleet destroyed with minimal human casualties. The Chaos Protocol works." News of the victory spread quickly through human space. For the first time since the war began, humanity had not just survived a Devourer attack, but had completely defeated it. More importantly, they had found a way to fight that the aliens couldn't counter. Meanwhile, Marine Sergeant Nina Foster was developing similar tactics for ground combat. Her unit had been stationed on Kepler Colony when the Devourers landed there. Ground forces. Instead of fighting from defensive positions like traditional soldiers, Nina's Marines used what she called controlled madness. "Listen up," she told her squad as they prepared for battle. "These bugs expect us to fight smart and organized, so we're going to fight dumb and crazy. Use whatever weapons you can find. Attack from directions that don't make sense. Make them think we've lost our minds." The battle for Kepler Colony became legendary among human forces. Marines used farming equipment as weapons, attacked uphill when they should have gone down, and seemed to ignore their own safety completely. One soldier, Private Jack Murphy, actually used a broken piece of alien technology to beat a Devourer warrior to death while screaming nonsense at the top of his lungs. The Devourer ground forces, like their space-based counterparts, couldn't adapt to tactics that seemed to have no strategy behind them. Their biomechanical brains kept trying to find patterns in human behavior, but there were no patterns to find. "The bugs are retreating," reported Corporal Lisa Stone over the radio. "They're actually running away from us." Nina watched through her binoculars as the Devourer forces pulled back to their landing ships. For creatures that had never known defeat, the experience of facing an enemy they couldn't understand was terrifying, but the real shock came from space. High Counselor Vexter of the Zephyrian Alliance was monitoring the battle from his command ship, hidden at the edge of the system. What he saw filled him with a fear he had never experienced before. "They're not just surviving," he whispered to his aide. "They're winning. How is this possible?" For thousands of years, the Devourers had been the Alliance's perfect weapon. No species had ever found a way to defeat them. But humans weren't trying to be smarter or stronger than the Devourers. They were being something the aliens had never encountered before, completely unpredictable. "Send a message to all Alliance worlds," Vextar ordered. "Warn them that the humans are more dangerous than we thought. They fight like no species we have ever seen." Back on Earth, Admiral Thompson was planning humanity's first major counteroffensive. The success of the Chaos Protocol had given them hope, but he knew the real war was just beginning. "We've proven we can beat them in small battles," he said to his staff. "Now we need to take the fight to them. It's time to show the galaxy that humans don't just survive. We win." For the first time in their history, the Devourers were retreating. Human forces had pushed them back from 12 colony worlds using the Chaos Protocol. But Admiral Eric Johnson knew that victory against the Devourers was only half the battle. The real enemy had always been the Zephyrian Alliance, and they would not let their control of the galaxy slip away without a fight. Eric stood on the bridge of his flagship, the UNS Defiance, watching as his fleet prepared for the most important mission in human history. Intelligence reports showed that the Zephyrian Alliance was mobilizing every ship they had. They planned to destroy humanity before the truth about the Devourers could spread to other species. "Admiral, we're receiving surrender offers from Devourer ships across 3 sectors," reported Captain Sue Davis from the communications station. "It seems like they've lost the will to fight." Eric nodded grimly. Without Zephyrian control, the Devourers were just lost and confused bioweapons. Some were shutting down completely, while others were trying to return to Alliance space. The real threat now came from their creators. "Any word from Dr. Turner's team?" asked Eric. "Yes, sir. Dr. Sam Turner reports that they've finished decoding the Devourer bioships. The evidence is clear. We have genetic records showing that the Devourers were created in Zephyrian laboratories. We also have communication logs proving the Alliance has been feeding species to them for centuries. This evidence would change everything, but only if they could get it to the other species in the Alliance." Eric knew that many of those species suspected the truth, but were too weak individually to challenge their protectors. Signal Major Wright. It's time for her mission to begin. Major Kelly Wright had volunteered for the most dangerous assignment of the war. She would lead a small team deep into Zephyrian space to broadcast the truth about the Devourers to every species in the Alliance simultaneously. If she succeeded, the galaxy would learn that their protectors were actually their oppressors. Kelly's team used a captured Devourer ship for their mission. The biomechanical vessel was strange to pilot, but it could pass through Alliance space without being questioned. As they approached the central Nexus station where the Alliance government operated, Kelly reviewed their plan one more time. "Remember, we only get one chance at this," she told her team. "Once we start broadcasting, every Alliance ship in the sector will be coming for us. We need to stay on the air long enough for the message to reach all 12 member species." The Nexus station was the heart of Alliance power. Built around an ancient space station, it had grown over thousands of years into a massive complex where representatives from all member species came to receive orders from the Zephyrian leadership. Kelly's ship docked at the station without incident. The team had disguised themselves as Alliance inspectors, using fake credentials provided by Sub-Commander Kyle Hahn, the Zephyrian officer who had defected to the human cause. They made their way through the station's corridors, heading for the central communication array. "There," whispered Sergeant Bob Martinez, pointing to a massive antenna complex. "That's our target. From there, we can reach every Alliance world, at once." They had just reached the communication center when alarms began blaring throughout the station. Kelly realized they had been discovered, but it was too late to abort the mission. "Get that broadcast ready," she ordered. "I don't care if the whole Alliance fleet is coming. We're going to tell the galaxy the truth." Meanwhile, Admiral Johnson's fleet was racing toward the Nexus station. They had to reach Kelly's team before the Alliance could stop the broadcast. But Eric knew they were running out of time. Long-range sensors showed hundreds of Alliance ships converging on their position. "Sir, we're detecting massive fleet movements," reported Lieutenant Dan Cooper from the sensor station. "It looks like every species in the Alliance is sending ships. We're outnumbered 50-1. Eric smiled. "That's exactly what we wanted. The more species that show up, the more will hear our message." The broadcast began just as the first Alliance ships arrived at the Nexus station. Kelly's voice, clear and strong, carried the truth across subspace to every corner of Alliance territory. "Citizens of the galaxy," she began, "you have been lied to for thousands of years. The Devourers are not a natural threat. They were created by the Zephyrian Alliance as a weapon to control you. Every species that refused Alliance protection was not destroyed by wild aliens. They were murdered by their supposed protectors. The effect was immediate. On Alliance ships throughout the sector, crews of different species began to understand why their protectors had always seemed so nervous when discussing the Devourers. The genetic evidence that Dr. Turner's team had decoded was broadcast along with Kelly's words, providing undeniable proof of Alliance crimes. "Captain, we're receiving signals from non-Zephyrian ships," reported the communications officer aboard one of the Alliance vessels. "The Corvin fleet is requesting to speak with human representatives. So are the Deltans and the Nexari." Species after species began to realize they had been victims rather than protected allies. The Alliance fleet, which had come to destroy humanity, began to fracture as different species turned against their Zephyrian commanders. High Counselor Vextar watched in horror from his command ship as his carefully maintained empire began to collapse. "Stop that broadcast," he ordered. "Send all available ships to the communication array." But it was too late. The truth was spreading faster than Alliance forces could move to stop it. Species that had been enemies for generations, kept apart by Alliance manipulation, began to communicate directly with each other for the first time. The battle for the Nexus station became unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It wasn't humans versus aliens or even Alliance versus rebels. It was dozens of different species, some fighting for freedom, others trying to maintain the old system, and many simply trying to figure out which side represented the truth. Admiral Johnson's fleet arrived in the middle of this chaos, but instead of facing the entire Alliance alone, they found themselves joining a coalition of species that had chosen freedom over security. "Admiral, this is Captain Zordan of the Corvin Liberation Fleet," came a transmission in heavily accented English. "We request permission to fight alongside human forces against our former oppressors." Similar messages came from 6 other species. For the first time in galactic history, multiple species were working together without Alliance control. The final battle took place around the Nexus station itself. Zephyrian ships, still loyal to the old system, fought desperately to maintain control. But they were vastly outnumbered by the coalition of free species that humanity had helped to create. Captain Tony Mitchell, now commanding a mixed squadron of human and alien ships, used adapted versions of the Chaos Protocol to confuse the remaining Zephyrian forces. The unpredictable tactics that had worked against the Devourers proved equally effective against their creators. "This is impossible," Vextar whispered as he watched his ships being destroyed by tactics he couldn't understand. "How can such a primitive species coordinate so many different cultures?" The answer was simple, though the Zephyrians would never understand it. Humans didn't try to control their allies, they inspired them. The species that joined the coalition did so because they wanted to be free. not because they were forced to submit. The battle ended when Vextar's flagship, the last major Zephyrian vessel, surrendered rather than be destroyed. The High Counselor himself was captured by a joint human-Corvan boarding party. In the months that followed, the galaxy began to rebuild itself without the Alliance's control. Species that had been kept weak and dependent learned to stand on their own. The Devourers, without Zephyrian guidance, either fled to the galactic rim or were safely shut down by their former victims. Ambassador Lisa Carter, the same woman who had first met the Zephyrians, now represented humanity in the new Galactic Freedom Coalition. She stood in the same meeting room where the Alliance had once dictated terms to subject species, but now the atmosphere was completely different. The old system is dead, she announced to representatives from 23 different species. We're not here to replace the Alliance's control with our own. We're here to make sure that no species ever again has to choose between freedom and survival. A year after humanity had first been warned about the Devourers, the galaxy looked completely different. The species that had once dismissed humans as too weak to matter now spoke of them with deep respect, not because humans had conquered anyone, but because they had taught everyone that the greatest strength came from refusing to accept defeat. Captain Rebecca Adams, now an admiral, stood on the observation deck of the new coalition headquarters, watching ships from dozens of species working together in ways that had been impossible under Alliance rule. "You know what the strangest part is?" she said to Admiral Johnson, who had joined her at the window. "What's that?" "The Zephyrians were right about one thing. No one should have feared humans, but not because we're weak, because we don't want to be feared. We just want to be free, and we want everyone else to be free too." Eric nodded, watching a human ship dock next to vessels from 6 other species. "I think that's what really scared them in the end.